All right, welcome in everyone, kicking off another deep dive here. And today, we are going to be looking at the world of business and management consulting, pulling our insights from a book called Business and Management Consulting, Delivering an Effective Project.
Okay.
And really our goal today is to kind of get a sense of what it is that consultants do, the different kind of methods that they employ, and really importantly, why businesses turn to these external experts for help.
Yeah, definitely. I think this is all about getting under the hood and really understanding how organizations use outside help to sort of navigate these challenges and plan for the future. And that means digging into their processes, how they work with clients, and yeah, I think ultimately the impact that they have.
Okay, so, flipping through this book, I was sort of struck by the thought of like, where did this whole profession even begin? Like, it's not like businesses have always had consultants on speed dial.
No, not at all. I think the need for something resembling modern consulting really took hold during the 18th and 19th centuries. And that was driven by those major industrial revolutions across Britain, Europe, and America. Businesses were suddenly grappling with how to scale up production, how to become more efficient, and that created a demand for specialized knowledge and how to optimize these new industrial processes. So I think if you look back at that initial focus on technical efficiency, it really laid the groundwork for today's data-driven approach to consulting. Even though the tools have changed dramatically, that core need for optimization remains.
So initially it was very much about the practical side of, how do you make this thing? Or how do you make this thing work better?
Precisely, think of those early consultants as specialists brought in to really advise on how to get the most out of these new technologies. Things like the telegraph, the railways. Arthur D. Little, whose firm ADL was established all the way back in 1886, he was a key figure, an engineer offering exactly that kind of expertise.
Interesting. So, from that very practical focus, how did we evolve to the kind of broader management consulting that we recognize today?
Well, alongside these technical specialists, the large accounting firms began to see opportunities beyond just auditing financial records. In the 1980s and 90s, firms like Andersen
Yeah.
and PricewaterhouseCoopers became really dominant players in the consulting world, expanding their offerings into a much wider range of management advice.
Right, the big names. But were there also more, specialized firms emerging around that time as well?
Absolutely. Andrew T. Kearney founded his firm in 1926. And in the same year, fellow accountant James O. McKinsey started his own consulting business. Their vision went beyond just financial guidance to encompass broader strategic and organizational advice. These early firms, ADL, McKinsey, A.T. Kearney, they became incredibly influential because they were effectively training grounds for future leaders in the consulting industry. So many of today's major consulting firms were actually founded by people who cut their teeth at these earlier powerhouses, like Bruce Henderson, who left ADL to establish the Boston Consulting Group in 1963. It's interesting to see how interconnected this industry has been, with these early firms really shaping the landscape we see today.
Yeah, almost like a breeding ground for this next generation of consultants. So moving forward to today, what does the consulting industry look like now? I know there have been some, pretty significant shifts, especially around the turn of the millennium.
You're right, the early 2000s were a period of really significant upheaval. There were increasing concerns about potential conflicts of interest when the same firm was providing both audit and consulting services, with this worry that objectivity in the audits could be compromised. And this ultimately led to some major separations, the most well-known being Andersen's consulting arm, splitting off in 2001 and rebranding as Accenture.
Yeah, that was huge. How did the overall market react to that?
Well, the market had been experiencing really rapid growth, expanding by over 10% annually leading up to 2001. But in 2002, we saw a really significant downturn, the first in 30 years, with the market shrinking by around 6%.
Wow.
This was driven by a cooling IT sector and growing skepticism from clients in the wake of the Enron Andersen accounting scandals, and it actually led to a decrease in the number of consultants employed.
So a pretty substantial impact, but the book suggests that, the industry did bounce back.
Yes, definitely. After a relatively flat year in 2003, the industry rebounded quite strongly. And this was driven by several key factors. The increasing globalization of business created more complex operating environments. The rapid advancement of information technology presented both new challenges and opportunities. And there was a growing recognition that knowledge and expertise were key sources of competitive advantage. Not just physical products or pricing. Businesses started to focus more on their core competencies and look to external specialists for those non-core activities. And the continued rise of outsourcing is a clear example of this trend.
So would you say that a consultant today needs to be more than just a deep expert in a specific niche?
Precisely, while having deep specialist skills remains essential for many projects. A successful consultant today also needs a broader set of skills, almost like a general manager. They need to be able to market their services effectively, persuade potential clients of their expertise, and build and maintain strong, long-term client relationships. It's really a blend of technical depth and that broad business understanding.
Okay, so you have a consultant coming into a client's organization. What kind of relationship are they trying to establish with the people that are already there?
Well, the nature of that relationship really hinges on two main aspects: the existing management structure and the roles of individuals within the client organization, and the specific goals that the client wants to achieve through the consulting engagement. Every organization has its own unique dynamics, but typically managers fulfill interpersonal,
Hmm.
informational, and decisional roles. And the consultant needs to understand how their work will intersect with those existing responsibilities. So in an informational role, a manager might need market data. Well, that's where a consultant could step in with specialized research and analysis.
So are consultants primarily there to kind of lead and direct, or more to support the existing team?
Well, it can really vary depending on the situation. So a consultant might complement that informational role, as we just discussed, by conducting market research or helping to establish management information systems. Think of those as the digital tools and processes a company uses to track and analyze its performance data. They could also support the spokesperson role by helping to develop key messages for customers or investors. And in these scenarios, they're often filling gaps or providing additional capacity.
What about when the client is really looking for more fundamental change within their organization?
That's where a consultant might take on a more differentiating role, helping the client business to refine and even specialize its management roles as the organization expands and evolves. Larger organizations in particular often have more opportunity for managers to focus on specific areas, and consultants can play a key role in facilitating that process of organizational design and specialization.
Okay, so we've talked about, strategy, we've talked about different roles, but what about the human side of things? Surely the consultant-client relationship also has an ethical dimension.
Absolutely. Consultants operate within the client's cultural and moral framework. Understanding and respecting those ethical norms is just as critical as adhering to legal obligations. If a consultant disregards a client's deeply held values, it can seriously undermine the project's effectiveness, and at worst, lead to the client rejecting the consultant's recommendations entirely. So outcomes that conflict with the client's ethical principles are very unlikely to be successfully implemented.
Okay, so the book also outlines these different modes of consulting. Can you walk us through what those are?
Certainly. So one is the expert mode. In this situation, the client has already clearly defined the problem they're facing, they've analyzed it, and they can articulate it to the consultant. The consultant then comes in and applies their specialized knowledge to develop and propose a solution. This mode is often used when the client recognizes a specific area where they lack internal expertise.
Okay, and what's the other main mode?
The other is the doctor-patient mode. Here, the consultant still brings their expert knowledge, but they also take on a more significant role in diagnosing the problem itself. The client might have a sense that something isn't quite right within the organization, or that the business could be performing better in some way, but they haven't been able to pinpoint the underlying issues. So the consultant uses their specialist skills and objective perspective to uncover those root causes.
That's an interesting distinction. So thinking about why businesses reach out. For this kind of external help, what are those core reasons? And on the flip side, why do these engagements sometimes not go as planned?
Well, there are several primary drivers. One major factor is the failure to really understand and adapt to changes in the market and in customer behavior. So customer preferences shift, competitors introduce new offerings, and the broader economic landscape evolves. So companies that aren't actively monitoring and responding to these changes risk falling behind. And I think the trap of simply copying what competitors are doing without conducting your own thorough research, that look before you leap principle, can be a real pitfall. And it's fascinating how often companies get caught in the success trap. Their past achievements sort of blind them to emerging threats, making external objective analysis so critical. You think of how established retailers struggle to adapt to the rise of e-commerce, sometimes just mimicking online strategies, without truly understanding those fundamental shifts in consumer behavior.
That makes a lot of sense. What are some other common challenges that lead businesses to seek out that outside expertise?
Well, I think weaknesses in fundamental business planning and performance is another significant reason. This can manifest in various ways, from not having a formal business plan at all, to issues like poor allocation of resources, setting unrealistic performance targets, experiencing uncontrolled growth that strains the organization, prioritizing short-term profits at the expense of long-term value creation, or even engaging in unprofitable diversification into new markets or product lines.
It sounds like a lot of these issues stem from a lack of, clear insights and effective analysis.
Precisely, sound management decisions really depend on a strong understanding of the business itself, its customers, its products or services, the markets it operates in, its supporting organizational structures, and its competitive landscape. So consultants can play a crucial role in gathering, analyzing, and presenting this vital information in a clear and actionable way, empowering the client's management team to make more informed decisions.
Okay, the book also touches on this concept of groupthink. How does that connect to the value that external consultants can bring?
Groupthink can be a significant obstacle to effective decision-making within organizations. When teams become too cohesive, there's a risk that they'll limit the range of options that they consider. They fail to critically examine initial objectives and overlook potential risks. So consultants coming from outside those established internal dynamics can offer a fresh objective perspective and challenge ingrained assumptions that might be going unchallenged within the company.
And what if there are sort of internal disagreements or competing agendas? Within a company, can consultants help to navigate those situations?
They can indeed. Sometimes a manager might be tempted to bring in a consultant to lend weight to their own position in an internal debate. However, it's absolutely essential for consultants to maintain their impartiality. If they're perceived as clearly siding with one faction or another, it will damage their credibility across the organization, and their advice is much more likely to be disregarded by those other key stakeholders.
I can see how that could be a delicate situation to manage. What about when a business is looking to secure funding or attract investors?
That's another area where consultants can provide considerable value. They can help businesses to develop a compelling and well-supported narrative for banks and venture capitalists by creating robust business plans and presentations that clearly articulate the investment opportunity and demonstrate that potential for strong returns.
Okay. And finally, implementing change within an organization is often a challenge. How do consultants contribute to managing organizational change effectively?
Well, resistance to change is a very common human response. People naturally tend to prefer the familiar and the predictable. So consultants can play a crucial role in managing this resistance. Sometimes the entire consulting engagement is focused on change management, and there are consultants who specialize in this area. More often, however, skills in change management are a necessary part of other types of projects, such as business expansions or structural reorganizations, to ensure that the proposed changes are successfully implemented and adopted by the organization.
Okay, so a business decides to engage a consultant. What does the typical process look like from the initial contact all the way through to the end of the project?
Most successful consulting projects follow a generally similar life cycle, although the specific duration and complexity can vary greatly depending on the nature of the engagement. So it usually starts with an initial contact between the client and the consulting firm, followed by a decision from both sides that there's a good fit to work together. Then comes a preliminary analysis of the client's issues and the development of a formal proposal outlining the consultant's approach, timeline, and fees.
So that initial proposal is really crucial for establishing expectations.
Absolutely. Following the acceptance of the proposal, a project charter is often created to further define the specific scope, objectives, and deliverables of the project. And this then leads into the in-depth analysis phase, where the consultants conduct their detailed investigation into the client's business. After the analysis is complete, the consultants work with the client to develop and implement the agreed-upon solutions. This is followed by the formal delivery of the project outcomes. And finally, a follow-up phase to ensure that the implemented solutions are working effectively and achieving those desired results.
So networking must be a pretty vital activity for consultants to find new clients and kind of build their business.
It's absolutely crucial. Consultants need to actively cultivate their professional network and build their visibility within their target markets. This often involves attending industry conferences and seminars, leveraging professional networking platforms like LinkedIn, and generally nurturing those relationships within their professional sphere. And satisfied clients can also be a significant source of referrals for future work.
And after a consulting project wraps up, is there typically a review process or a post-mortem?
There definitely should be. So project review and evaluation is essential for consultants to continuously learn and improve their performance. This involves looking back at what went well during the project, what could have been done better, and often seeking feedback directly from the client, either through informal discussions or more formal surveys.
Okay, and the book gives us a little glimpse into a few examples of consulting projects. Can you give us a quick overview of those?
Certainly. So there's the case of Go Global, a tour operator that was experiencing issues related to an aggressive management style, which was negatively impacting their relationships with both customers and competitors. Then we have the Westminster Arts Festival, or WPAF, which was facing a range of strategic, operational, and people challenges due to an aging volunteer base, a lack of a clear succession plan for those key roles, and internal competition among different parts of the organization.
Those sound like pretty different sets of problems.
They are. And finally, there's Delphi Fashions, a company that was seeking assistance in developing their marketing plan. This required the consultant to gain a deep understanding of the market, identify potential new customer segments, and analyze Delphi's competitive advantages in order to create an effective marketing strategy. And I think these brief examples really illustrate the diverse array of challenges that businesses face and the varied ways in which consultants are called upon to help.
Well, we've certainly delved deeply into the world of business and management consulting today, pulling some really valuable insights from this book. What would you say are the key takeaways that you'd want our listeners to remember from our conversation today?
Well, firstly, I think it's important to remember that it's a constantly evolving and dynamic field with a rich history, always adapting to the changing needs of businesses and the broader economic landscape. Secondly, consultants provide significant value by bringing specialized expertise, an objective perspective, and structured methodologies to help organizations address their challenges and achieve those strategic objectives.
Yeah, and it seems like the quality of the relationship between the consultant and the client is absolutely critical for success.
Absolutely. It's built on a foundation of trust, ethical conduct, and a clear shared understanding of the project goals. And I think it's worth emphasizing that effective consulting goes beyond just conducting analysis and making recommendations. It also requires strong communication skills, the ability to manage change effectively within that client organization, and a deep understanding of organizational dynamics and culture. So whether you're preparing for a meeting, trying to get up to speed on the field, or simply have a general curiosity, understanding these fundamental aspects of consulting provides valuable insights into how businesses approach problem solving and strategic development.
What were some of the more, intriguing specifics or aha moments that stood out to you during our discussion today?
Well, I think the fact that so many of today's major consulting firms can trace their origins back to individuals who gained experience at those much earlier firms like Arthur D. Little, McKinsey, and A.T. Kearney. It's quite remarkable. It really highlights that interconnectedness of the industry and the way knowledge and best practices have been passed down over time. And I think this significant market disruption following the Enron Anderson scandals serves as a powerful reminder of the paramount importance of trust and ethical conduct in the consulting profession. The distinction between the expert mode and the doctor-patient mode of consulting elegantly illustrates those different ways in which clients might initially frame their needs and the different roles that a consultant might play. That cautionary note about the dangers of simply mimicking competitors without conducting thorough independent analysis is a timeless lesson for any business, and the concept of consultants sometimes being used to provide support for internal arguments, and the critical need for them to maintain impartiality to preserve their credibility offers a fascinating glimpse into organizational dynamics.
And finally, I think understanding the structured life cycle of a typical consulting project provides a clear framework for how that external expertise is typically delivered. And those brief real-world examples really help to illustrate the diverse nature of the challenges that consultants are asked to address.
And to wrap things up, what's a thought-provoking question for our listeners to consider as they go about their day?
We're given the ever-increasing access to information and the growing levels of internal expertise within organizations. What will be the defining characteristics of the most successful and sought-after consultants in the years to come? Will it be an even greater degree of specialization in those highly niche areas, exceptional skills in facilitation and collaboration to unlock and leverage internal knowledge, or perhaps an entirely new set of capabilities that we can't fully anticipate today? So this is something I think for you to reflect on as you continue your own learning and professional journey.
Some really insightful points to ponder. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us today. Until our next exploration, this has been The Deep Dive.